Constitutional amendments.
This is a major one. The analysis stresses that Article 132 gives the federal parliament the exclusive authority to amend the Constitution.
Exclusive authority.
Yes. And what makes this particularly striking, as we touched on, is that Medobe himself had previously endorsed this very process in that NCC agreement.
Right, the inconsistency.
Exactly. Yabaro's paper labels their rejection here as unconstitutional and politically disingenuous.
Okay, claim number 4, and this seems huge. The Constitution is not valid unless accepted by the federal member states.
Yeah, this hits at the very foundation. The analysis counters this by citing Article 4, which declares the Constitution the supreme law throughout Somalia, second only to Sharia.
Supreme law meaning it binds everyone.
It binds all levels of government, guides all policy. The argument in the paper is clear. Federal member states cannot simply opt out of the nation's supreme law. That negates the whole concept.
Makes sense. 5th claim. They declared that the FMS will run their own elections independently.
And again, the analysis refers back to Article 111G and the national electoral laws. These require elections to be uniform and federally supervised.
Why uniform?
To ensure fairness, consistency, and national integrity. Independent, uncoordinated regional elections, the source argues, would seriously undermine all of that.
Okay. 6th point. They allege the FGS uses political favoritism in appointments.
Now, the analysis doesn't dismiss the concern itself, but it addresses the method. It suggests that if there are legitimate concerns about favoritism, the proper channels are things like parliamentary review or the judicial process.
Not just putting it in a communiqué.
Precisely, using established legal and institutional mechanisms, not just public declarations that bypass those systems.
Understood. 7th claim. The president centralized power and violated the Constitution.
Similar to the last point, the analysis looks at the Constitution itself, Articles 87 to 90, which outline presidential powers and actions, including pursuing reforms.
So the argument is the president acted within his authority.
The analysis suggests his actions, like reform initiatives, fall within that legal authority. And crucially, it argues that any specific allegations of overreach or violation need to go through formal legal channels, impeachment processes, judicial review, not just be asserted in a political statement.
Right, process matters. Okay, 8th point. They endorsed something called the Council for National Salvation. What's that about?
This raised serious constitutional red flags in the analysis. Article 1, Section 3 of the Constitution clearly states Somalia has one sovereignty, one state.
One sovereignty.
Yes.
Yeah.
So supporting a parallel body, like a Council for National Salvation, is viewed by Yabaro's research as an attempt to create a rival governance structure.
Which would be?
Fundamentally unconstitutional, a challenge to the state's unified sovereignty.
Okay. Point 9 involves Somalia's place in the world. They claimed the FGS cannot represent Somalia abroad without FMS consent.
This claim directly targets Somalia's international standing. The analysis points out that Article 1.3 ensures Somalia has one single international legal identity.
And foreign policy.
Article 54 gives the federal government exclusive control over foreign policy. So this attempt by regional states to get veto power over foreign representation, the paper argues, threatens Somalia's diplomatic sovereignty. Is a serious overstep, according to this legal view.
Exclusive control. Okay. And the final point, number 10, a very broad claim. The federal government is illegitimate.
The analysis is quite emphatic here. It argues the Constitution itself provides clear mechanisms for accountability and challenging legitimacy. Articles 69, 71, 91 cover parliamentary oversight, votes of no confidence, impeachment.
So, again, follow the established rules.
Exactly. Accountability must follow these constitutional, parliamentary, and judicial processes, not be decided by regional leaders issuing public statements.
Wow, okay. That's a detailed legal breakdown of each point in the communiqué based on Yabaro's research. It paints a picture of, well, deep constitutional disagreement.
Absolutely. A fundamental clash over the rules of the game.
So, we've heard the challenge from Puntland and Jubaland and the legal counter-arguments. But what's the other side of the story? What has the federal government actually been doing during this time, according to the analysis?
Well, the narrative presented in Yabaro's research paints a contrasting picture. It portrays the federal government, with the backing of the federal parliament, as making significant strides in actually advancing democratic governance.
Okay, like what are the key achievements highlighted?
Several big ones are mentioned. First, back on November 23, 2024, the federal parliament passed a new electoral law.
And the significance of that?
It formally enshrines one person, one vote as the foundation for Somalia's electoral system. That's a landmark piece of legislation moving away from older, less direct systems.
That does sound huge, especially given Somalia's history. Was it just a law on paper?
No, and that's the next point. The analysis highlights that in early 2025, actual voter registration kicked off in Mogadishu.
And how did that go?
The source describes tens of thousands of citizens queuing peacefully to register. It portrays this as a genuinely historic moment, tangible evidence of democratic progress and public participation.
Peaceful queues for voter registration that sends a powerful message. Is this just happening in the capital?
Not according to the analysis. It says the one-person, one-vote process is now being rolled out in other federal member states too: Galmudug, Southwest, SSC Katumo, and Hirshabelle.
So expanding beyond Mogadishu.
Yes. The stated aim is to hold constitutional, transparent, and inclusive elections at all levels, local, regional, and eventually federal, using this new system.
That's a really strong counter-narrative presented in the analysis.
Yeah.
It emphasizes this progress as reflecting the will of the Somali people. How does the source illustrate that popular support, especially against the backdrop of these regional leaders' challenges?
The analysis really leans into this. It argues that these democratic steps, the new law, the voter registration, the planned rollout, aren't just top-down political moves by the FGS.
Right.
It presents them as reflecting a genuine desire from the Somali population for this kind of direct democracy. The argument is essentially that this whole electoral reform movement has momentum. It's backed by law, by visible public participation, and by the legitimacy of the federal institutions involved.
And the implication is?
The implication, according to the source, is that this movement represents a powerful, perhaps even irreversible shift towards constitutional democracy. It's framed as something designed precisely to withstand the kind of challenges being mounted by Puntland and Jubaland through their communiqué. It suggests a kind of groundswell that can't easily be stopped by political statements deemed unconstitutional.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. To recap our deep dive today.
Yeah.
We've really explored this core tension in Somalia. On one hand, you have the challenge from Puntland and Jubaland, questioning the provisional constitution itself.
And on the other hand, you have the federal government's perspective, as presented in Yabaro's analysis, pushing forward with democratic reforms and asserting the supremacy of that same constitution.
Right. It's a fundamental conflict.
And the central argument coming out of Yabaro's legal analysis is pretty clear. The Constitution isn't some optional agreement you can pick and choose from.
It's the foundation.
It's presented as the supreme legal framework, the thing that guarantees unity, justice, and sovereignty for the whole country. The conclusion drawn in the paper is that Somalia's future has to lie in the rule of law, in giving every citizen one vote, and in having a government that's accountable to all its people, not just specific regions or leaders.
It leaves us with a lot to think about. As you, our listener, consider this really complex situation, maybe ask yourself, what does it really mean for a relatively young nation when the very rules designed to hold it together become a political battleground?
Yeah, and how can that delicate balance be struck between, necessary regional autonomy and the need for a strong, functioning central government, especially when the argument is over the most fundamental laws of the land?
A crucial question, and one Somalia is grappling with right now.